Ladies and gentlemen, we are live. MythVision podcast. We're going to be discussing the myth of the lost tribes of Israel, usually or commonly known as the 10 northern tribes of Israel. They consist of 12 tribes, but whatever happened to them? And we're going to discuss the history behind that with a scholar today. And before we do so, let me give you our intro. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision podcast. Get ready, ladies and gentlemen. I have a super exciting guest. Last time we had Dr. Zvi Ben-Dor Benite join us. The energy was really, really good. Welcome back to MythVision.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Every time I meet you, I learn new things about, how to communicate with the world.
Hey.
Yeah. Academics should make it do it more, I guess.
Hey, you did a wonderful job last time. You were getting me pumped up, and you almost ran late to someone's graduation in your family. And I was like, man. So real quick, because we only have 60 minutes with you, everyone who hasn't read your book, The 10 Lost Tribes, A World History, really should, to get a good grasp on how this mythos keeps continuing and its power in theological circles throughout the world. Just all sorts of denominational backgrounds and even modern cults that have developed out of this utilize this kind of concept. It's that powerful and it's been around for so long. So we're going to be discussing that. Everyone should check out the book. Links in the description. Recommended MythVision books. You guys can get it there. Also, Patreon. If you guys haven't joined it, I'm telling you, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos have not been released to the public. You'll have access and you can ask questions, private message me. I can ask your questions to scholars, recorded, etc. No more wasted time. Dr. Benite, yes. I really appreciate your book. I want to go back before we get into some more contemporaneous and even, a couple centuries old ideas. First things first. I noticed in the Talmud, for example, certain references that some rabbis jabbed at Samaritans, but it's not a new thing. That had been going on for centuries. You're not really one of us. You're a half-breed. You're not really Israel. And they say, no, we are Israel. You even have the Samaritan Pentateuch, right? So there's like really this tradition, a deep root on both sides that go way back. The question is, when the Assyrians conquer and they take them into captivity and Judea still remains until the Babylonians exile them and whatnot, and they come back and Israel does not come back with them, who's in the land? Oh, there's these people that don't belong. Right. The question is that factual or is this a historical polemic? What do scholars say about that?
Right. Yeah. So let's begin by looking at it, first of all, in the time of the early, late Second Temple period, and later on, what you call the beginning of, the Mishnah and the Talmud, in other words, what we call the oral or the rabbinic tradition in Judaism. And the debate there is about two things. Is about, what is Israel and who is Israel? Yes, Israel in the sense of, the people who have the covenant, but also where is the center? And the Samaritan tradition insists that, the mountain upon where there's the covenant, where you communicate with God, is not Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, which itself is not exactly identified, but, Mount Gerizim in Shechem or in Nablus. That's the debate. It's not about, what's your genealogy. It's not about where do you come from. Okay. That's very, very critical, because if you look at the Samaritan Pentateuch, when they say the place that he shall choose, he being God, Hamakom asher yivhar, yes, the reference is not to Jerusalem. According to them, the reference is to Mount Gerizim. Okay, so first of all, it is a debate about the location of the Bible, not of the Bible, the location of the temple.
Gotcha. I distracted you with a wonderful compliment from my friend here, Eric. Thank you for the super chat, Eric. By the way, he loves your energy.
Yeah, got me a second. So that's very, very important. In other words, think about it as two. Think about it as two teams, in sports. These are the Mets and these are the Yankees. It's all about baseball, yes. It's all about the same thing, yeah. But one, say here's where we go and here's where we go. So that's very, very important. Now, then you can, from that, once you understand that, you begin now to see how different groups make sure that they differentiate themselves from another group. And we should all know that the closer you are, yes, the more intense the debate is, and the more the need to differentiate from each other is. Okay, and we can talk about it later on. Between Jews and Christians, precisely because the sameness, the difference is very, very small. Yes. At that point, you need to make the effort to differentiate is even bigger. So the locus, the crux of the debate here is like where is the mountain where God said my temple is going to be there? My house is going to be there. Okay. Now, I'm not going to speak for the Samaritans. The only thing I'm going to say for the Samaritans is the Samaritans basically say when God says Hamakom asher yivhar, the place that He shall choose, is not Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. Okay?
Right.
That's the debate. Now, the Bible itself, okay? In other words, let's say the Book of Kings, not the Torah, but the Book of Kings, which is the locus of the historical material in the Bible, okay, gives you plenty of evidence that, Mount Gerizim in Nablus or in Shechem is holy. Okay, Joshua puts an altar there. Joshua is from the tribe of Ephraim, which is the center, which is centered around that area, etc., etc., etc. Okay, that gives us, some room to understand that the debate that in the Second Temple period, in the Talmudic period, the debate is now about, the temple itself actually goes back to earlier times, and it is not only about where the temple is going to be, but it's also about politics. What do you mean by politics? You have the tribe of Judah centered on Jerusalem, says that's where we're going to be. Okay, this is where the temple is going to be, and the temple means it's near the palace, it's near the kingdom, it's near where you have direct link to God, where people should come and worship, and so on and so forth. But there's another tribe, even bigger, and in fact even politically much stronger. That's the tribe of Ephraim. It says no, it's going to be where we are, where our capital is. Shechem or Samaria, basically in the same region. Okay. Now, the fact that the Bible admits or says that there was another political center in the north, is important to understand that these traditions do not come out of complete vacuum.
Right.
Okay. Now, the people in Judah, centered in Jerusalem, had one big advantage, that they did nothing for it. What is it? They got to survive. They got to survive after the destruction of the kingdom of Samaria. Okay, in other words, after the northern Israelite kingdom, they got to survive more. So they got to write the history, a little bit longer. And at that point, there is a change. You see the certain changes. First of all, you see the beginning of the emphasis on Jerusalem, because Jerusalem now has no competitor. Okay, but if you look at the earlier period, Jerusalem competes with other temples, with Shiloh, with Bethel, and of course with the putative one in Shechem, in Mount Gerizim.
Do they ever compete with Elephantine, the Elephantine temple, or not really?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really, because elephant never got to be like a serious contender.
Right.
Okay, it's kind of a derivative of the one in Jerusalem, and it's in a different period. Okay, but you can see, for instance, why would you insist? Why would you have stories about Jacob in Bethel, and later on have a story about the golden calf in Bethel? Okay, that someone is obsessed with that. Okay. And I guess we should not be very, very. We don't even have to look for clues who's obsessed with that. Who's obsessed with that? The person who actually made an expedition all the way to Bethel. If you read about the Josiah's expedition, okay, in the middle of the 7th century, where the northern kingdom doesn't exist for at least for several decades already. Okay, but King Josiah, he makes an expedition, a northern expedition, all the way to the north, when we can see already the Assyrian Empire is gone or in decline. Okay, and this is an amazing thing. They talk about the northern expedition, but all they do is go maybe 5-6 miles, to Bethel, all the way from Jerusalem, and destroy the temple that was there. Now, it says that it doesn't say that there was a temple there, but it says that Josiah destroyed the temple that was there. Okay, that's the tricky situations that they do. Okay, we should assume that there were other temples. The Bible doesn't call them temples, but they're clear that they were center of worship. Okay, that there were centers of worship and so on. Now, we are playing here two games. One is between, one game is the historical reality that keeps speaking to us from the biblical material about what was going on in Shechem, religiously and politically, in the ancient period, while the Israelite kingdom the northern kingdom was still there, okay, before it was destroyed by Sargon II in 721 BCE. The second period, okay, the second layer of the story is the story that comes when you have two communities with two types of almost similar scripture, almost similar, and not exactly similar, but almost similar. Let's say an alien from Mars or an alien from Rome, would have hard time identifying the two, identifying the differences. But for them, this is a serious debate. One says the temple or the place of choice should be in the north on Mount Gerizim, and another says no, it should be in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. Okay, what we call the Temple Mount. Okay, now this is exactly this point, where you have now two competing genealogies as well. The Samaritans would say, we are the keepers, and we are the continuous link to the people who were, to the priests and the people who worshipped on Mount Gerizim. And we have proof. Here's our scripture. Okay? Mm-hmm. The people in Jerusalem would say, well, wait a minute, we are the ones who worshipped in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is exclusively the place that God chose to have the temple. Yes, and once they say that, they need to say another thing. Okay, they need to say, well, if we say who we are, we need to say who you are as well. Okay, and that is the moment where you recover the story from the Bible about the people exiled to Samaria by Sargon II or other Assyrian kings. Yes,
right.
And then you assign that genealogy. No Samaritan would say that. Okay? Right. It's what Judahites in Jerusalem say about the Samaritans.
So that's why it's like, if I ask you, is that factually true? It's there's no way to prove whether
there's no way to prove. Yeah. Now let's go back now to the let's go back to the 8th century.
Okay.
BCE, because in the 8th century, it says that in the book of Kings, it says, okay, Sargon, the king of Assyria showed up, exiled the people from Samaria, etc., destroyed their kingdom and so on and so forth, and brought people from other areas to this. Okay. First of all, let's talk about, the historical reality that is coming out of that story, and it is real. Yes. What's real in there? It is real that, and we know that they did this, that basically the part of the Assyrian Empire's mechanism was, okay, we come into a territory, the people who rebelled against us, we punish them. Yes. We don't remove all of them, but we remove their elite and their leadership, and we plant them elsewhere. What is this elsewhere? Maybe another province that we just conquered and we need to develop. Okay? Now, it should not be strange to us that empires do that. Think about, the development of the United States or the American colonies, okay? You move people and you bring people in order to say, okay, now you get to work here so we can make profit out of this new land that we acquired, okay? So just as Sargon II, removes people, and he left Stela, and he says, like, I sacked Samaria and I took 27,300 and something people, and I counted them as Assyrians, because everybody now becomes a subject of the empire. Right. Now, and then the Bible says that he brought people to Samaria. Who are these people? Poor refugees from other areas that the Assyrians conquered, okay? Now, if you look at what archaeology is trying to estimate, the Assyrians really did a lot in the ancient Near East. They conquered a ton of people, okay? Mm-hmm. And they exiled a ton of people, and they moved and they reshuffled a ton of people. This is what empires sometimes do, okay? So it brings people in. And then the Bible says something really interesting about that. It says that these people who were newly brought, they started suffering from all sorts of problems, okay? Let's call it the religious immune system was weakened. Lions were attacking them and so on. They were not really, they had all sorts of issues, all sorts of problems, okay? And the Bible says, well, of course, the local God, Yahweh, and in a way there is an implicit recognition that in fact Yahweh was in fact worshipped in the north. Okay, not just in Jerusalem. Otherwise, why would you have a problem? The whole thing is supposed to be a big problem if you worship it in the north. Okay? Right. But then the Bible says, and the Bible kind of admits the story, admits that, there are some problems in the story that the Bible itself tells. Okay, it says, okay, well, then the Assyrians realized that the new settlers who are brought from elsewhere, they have issues, they have problems, they can't get along with the local deity, and therefore, the king of Assyria goes back to the exilees or to the refugees from Samaria, and he brings some priests back. Yes. Back and says, okay, go ahead and teach the people, these new settlers, teach them how you worship the local deity so they can get along with this local deity. and now let's translate it into political and economic matters so they can basically settle this land and start producing the harvest that I need to tax. Okay? Now, when the people in Jerusalem who are now feuding with the Samaritans need to assign a new genealogy to the Samaritans. They say, like, okay, we need to explain where did these people come from. They go back to the Bible, and now we're back in the Second Temple period. They say, okay, you remember that story about people being exiled to Samaria as opposed to people who are exiled from Samaria? Okay, these are their descendants. And how come they have scripture and some knowledge about our God? Yes. Oh, yeah. They learned all of that stuff from those priests, that were brought back in order to teach them the way of our deity, how to worship our deity, so they can do that. Okay.
But did they exclude them for ethnic reasons at that time? By then it was like or was it also the place of worship combined with the idea?
We should be very careful about, when we talk about ethnicity.
Right.
Okay? It's not about ethnicity. First of all, we don't even know what is the ethnicity of the Judahite himself. Let us not forget that the Maccabees or the Hasmonaim, they converted the Edomites or the people whom they called the Edomites. Herod, who was one of the greatest Jewish kings or the builders and so on, the builder of the temple himself, was not ethnically, as Jewish. He was an Edomite who was converted, and there were other peoples in the north who were converted in order to basically achieve a certain demographic edge, Plus, the area has been reshuffled for so many centuries that you can't really tell, there's no
So it's better to say that God is regional. It's usually temple centric regionally. It's a land God connection, and sometimes there's that connection to the blood, like Paula Fredrickson talks about. I think.
Yeah, but you are better off saying simply, reading the text as it is. Okay, who are the Samaritans? The Samaritans were the people who basically say that the temple should be on Mount Gerizim in the north. That's it. We don't know
a question from the super chat, by the way, if you don't mind me taking.
Yeah.
Okay, right here. So my friend ScholarVid, thank you for the super chat, says, according to the dual origins hypothesis, the two Hebrew traditions first arise as separate monarchies and are later united. As the northern kingdom was far more powerful, doesn't that mean the temple in Mount Gerizim was more important and influential than the temple in Jerusalem? He's trying to get you in trouble, by the way. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, well, I mean,
just kidding.
Look.
Just kidding.
First of all, look, I was born in Jerusalem, and I have no problem. It doesn't hurt my ego to admit that probably politically, yes, at some point, whatever was on Mount Gerizim was far more important. Okay, now, why do I say that with complete confidence or with some confidence? Very simple. The northern kingdom was richer. The northern kingdom was more populated. The northern kingdom was politically stronger. There's plenty of archaeological evidence that supports that. And if they had a temple on Mount Gerizim, it was probably far more important. Now, how do I know that? Because the people the people who sit in Jerusalem are obsessed with that temple in Mount Gerizim. Now, listen. If you have a frenemy, that doesn't really challenge you, you're not that obsessed with them.
Yeah.
Okay? You're not that obsessed with them. But if you have a frenemy that is really challenging you, yes, you're obsessed with them, and you would do whatever it takes to say, well, you know what? You don't really count. Okay?
Right.
Now, archaeologists estimate, that the period that we're talking about, there were probably 100,000 people in the kingdom of Judah. We're back now in 8th century BCE, or even before that, and about 3 times as much in the north. Now it makes sense. The north has more water. Yes, its economy is much more developed. Think about King Ahab. King Ahab, according to external evidence, was able to send no less than 2,000 chariots to a battle to form a coalition against Assyria. In the 9th century, before the time of that we're talking about. Before the northern kingdom was destroyed. That means that he was a major regional player. Okay, that means that the northern kingdom was very serious. Not to mention that the Bible itself tells that the northern kingdom pretty much had Jerusalem as its vassal for a very, very long time. Okay, I'm assuming that because of that, it's safe to say that that temple was more important. Okay, now, what do you mean by more important? Okay, when you assign a holiness to a place, it's clearly the most important thing to the people who worship at that place. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I don't know. When I say it was more important, I said probably more people went there. Probably, more. There was more revenue,
more robust, more like bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, theologically, how important it is. I mean, assuming that there is a link to God, we cannot gauge that. We cannot measure that. Okay. And that's the problem, I would say, with any temple anywhere in the world. How can you measure, which temple works, to communicate with the specific deity? You don't know that. It's we decide how holy a place is. Okay.
If I may, I don't want to take you off of where you're at. I don't know if there's a point specifically you would really want to address in this particular, because I know your time's limited. I say this because we only have 35 minutes, and I got to talk about Josephus for sure too. But,
all right.
But what do you want to make up a point specifically you think is important between the Samaritans and the Jews? And then I kind of want to take us into the first.
The important point I want to say is this. It is a competition between two different communities. They have many differences, but the key difference is where the temple is supposed to be. In other words, where is the place that God chose for this temple? Jews, or people who call Jews today, have been insisting on Jerusalem. Yes. The people who are known as the Samaritans insist on Mount Gerizim. That's where they do their sacrifices to this day. Yes. The religion, in terms of the sacrifices and the rituals, is almost similar, okay, except for this key difference. And all the stories that we build are built on this key difference. Okay, I don't want to speak for the Samaritans, but I think I'm safe enough to say that this is what they say. Okay, now the idea that they are the descendants of the people exiled by the Assyrians to Samaria,
right,
is in fact something that their rivals invented for them. It's a genealogy that was invented for them. Okay,
right,
and this is not the only time that you do that.
We see this conflict all the way through the Hebrew Bible, in a sense, because when we see later prophets, they're clearly saying, don't worry, when God's done with evil on earth and he comes to save Jerusalem, his holy mountain, it's clear Jerusalem's the place. So I say that to say there's a friction between these two groups. What reality is, we don't know with certainty, but we know the Samaritans believe that they are really this, and the Jews believe that they're really not, for whatever political, religious reasonings. But when you get down into the first century, we see this issue happening also in the New Testament. There's still this friction. And I know you're not the New Testament guy is so much, don't get me wrong, you're well aware of it, I'm certain, but that's not like I specialize in it. But Josephus, I want to bring one point that I think is important to get into that real quick here. We've got a super chat. If you super chat, you interrupt me, you get to ask your question, by the way. Scott Duke says, great live stream today. Derek, was Gerizim an influential religious locality in the 5th century BC, as indicated by the Elephantine writers seeking their approval for their temple as with Jerusalem?
I would say, and again, I'm guessing here, it seems to me that it was influential enough to be to be and to continue to be a religious center for some people. Okay, continuously. In other words, the fact that even today there are people on earth who say that place has a meaning, a religious meaning for them, means that in 2,500 years ago it was even more so.
Right.
Okay. Now, history erased a lot. History moved things a lot. There were other conquerors, other religions, but still, there is a continuous worship in that place. That means that the more you go back in time, in fact, the more influential it is. But it is influential for the people who consider this influential. Okay, not for others. Not for others. That's a key. Now, Elephantine is an amazing.
It is.
It's an amazing case, because what happens with an Elephantine is like some people escape Jerusalem, and they go down the Nile. They get to the island of Yev, and what they do there is they keep some of their traditions, and they leave us with invaluable archaeological material. Okay. Now, first of all, the one thing that we can say about the Jews or the Judahites of Elephantine is that they not necessarily subscribe to the idea that Jerusalem should be the exclusive center.
Right.
They clearly accept Jerusalem to be a religious center.
Like the big brother, kind of. But
yes. But, if they thought it should be the exclusive center, they would not build a temple in Elephantine.
And I think don't they ask for permission, or they try something like that? And is Samaria a power at that time? I think the question was like,
no, not at all.
Gerizim wasn't. Jerusalem was. Okay.
Not at all. It was. Samaria meant something for the people whom we call Samaritans, but not for the people, not for anybody else.
Okay.
Now, what is Elephantine in this case? Let's think about it as a sort of a franchise. Okay. Okay, you know what? I mean, we're here, deep in Egypt, but we want to have our own McDonald's here. And the people in Jerusalem, I don't think that the people in Jerusalem didn't really have a say. But if they had a say, say, okay, as long as you keep, the same menu, you go ahead, and put it there, I mean,
it's like nodding your head as long as they get approval in some sense, but they really couldn't do anything even if they wanted to.
Right.
Okay.
Now, very important here. The temple in Jerusalem, we know that even in the kingdom of Judah, Even in the tribe of Judah was not exclusive. How do we know that? The Bible keeps complaining about the fact that, King Josiah and King Hezekiah and this king or that king, still had to fight with people who were, burning on the altar and sacrificing in elsewhere. So the fact that they have to struggle to center to make Jerusalem a center means that it's not the center. Yes, if everybody accepts it's the center, there's no problem. Yes, the fact that they need to keep insisting on that. Now, if you go to southern Israel today, you will go to a place called Tel Arad. And in Tel Arad, you see a Judahite settlement that existed, in the 9th century, from the 9th century to the 7th century. And there you see a temple. I was there. It's a beautiful thing. And then you see a temple. And not only you see a temple that was at some point deliberately destroyed. And archaeologists estimate that the moment of this deliberate destruction is actually talked about in the Bible itself during the time that we know as the Hezekiah reform. In other words, towards the end of the 8th century BCE, yes, there was a reform before the reform of King Josiah that was already trying to make Jerusalem not only a center of religious worship, but also the exclusive center. That's the key difference here. Okay, so we go to Arad today, we find a temple. It's amazing. You go there, you see the altar, you get really, really excited, and then you see actually a place that is probably functioned as the holiest of holy. And it's amazing. You're not supposed to see something like that, right?
Yeah,
it's supposed to be completely mystified. Yet you walk in and it's right there. Okay. And then you see that someone came and deliberately destroyed it. And then you say, why did they deliberately destroy it? Oh, yeah, sure. In fact, the Bible tells us that King Hezekiah did exactly that, destroyed competing centers. Now, theoretically, this is the same people, the people of Judah, answering to the same king, yes, and worshiping the same deity. But here we have a leap, because that deity said, or the king, speaking to this, on behalf of this deity said, okay, you should worship only in Jerusalem. Okay, it's not enough that you believe in that deity. You should worship that deity only in my place. In other words, when you bring your lambs and your bulls and your sheep to sacrifice, and you feed the priests, it should be the priests in Jerusalem. Let us not forget, it's about money.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. We got more super chats. I want to get
where do the names of the 10 tribes come from?
Yes. Thank you for the super chat, though, Scott Duke and Aryan. I appreciate it. Where do the names come from?
Okay. Well, I don't know. Here's what I do know. Okay. We know that there were certain regions, okay, in this area, that had these names. Okay, they had the name Menashe, they had the name Ephraim, they have the name Gad, etc., etc., etc. Now, some of these names, tell us all sorts of things. For example, Gad was a god, a certain god, of luck, and then there was a territory named Gad, and the people in this territory, okay, the people in this territory call themselves, the tribe of God. But when you say the tribe of God, what do you mean? You mean a tribe that all of them are descendants of a certain patriarch whose name was God? Or you mean the people who live in a territory that is named God?
Right.
Okay? That's very, very different. Okay, or Ephraim. Okay, Ephraim, it's a name that in ancient Hebrew means, speaks about a certain abundance. Afar means, a very, very green area. Afarim means green, very green area. So Ephraim means like twice as much, or two areas that are green, or have a lot of, that speaks maybe to the abundance of waters in this area and so on. Now, who are the people of Ephraim? Are they the descendants of a patriarch named Ephraim? Or are the people who live in a territory that is called Ephraim? Okay. Now,
difference between theology and geography mixing into this cultural cultic practice.
It's totally mixed. Now, another thing that we can see is that someone later on says, okay, let's take all of this geography and turn it into history. Okay. Then, not only do history, but also a theologically charged history. Then they say, okay, well, wait a minute. Okay. Let's take all of these people and say, first of all, they were descendants of, one patriarch whose name was Jacob. And for some reason, his name was later on changed to Israel. And then, he had all of this. He had these 12 children. Okay. And then each child had a name, and the name signifies something for the mother that gave birth to that child. Okay. But that's a much later story. This is after we had the territories with those names. Mm-hmm. Someone gave someone assigned meanings to these names.
Wow, thank you. Last one here, Mr. Keeps on Ticking. If the ark and its content was in Jerusalem in the temple, what was physically present at Shiloh, Bethel, and Shechem to make them centers of worship?
Okay. Well, this is way out of my expertise. I consider myself an amateur. Let me try to do my best here. Okay. We can be very sure that these places were places of worship. Okay. We can be very sure about that. That something was going on there, some religious activity was going on there, and this was a center of worship, of pilgrimage, and so. Okay. Now, since the author of the Bible are centered in Jerusalem, and they are completely and heavily invested in saying that the temple in Jerusalem is the only temple, they would find other names for the other places, and they would avoid calling them temple, and more importantly, they would avoid calling them, the house of the Lord. Yes, because if you look at the biblical text, you see that actually it doesn't say mikdash, yes, temple. It says, Bet Adonai. Yes, the house of the Lord. Now, if the Lord insists that its place of dwelling is Jerusalem, nowhere else could be the house of the Lord. Mm-hmm. And then we begin to quibble with ourselves, how we define a temple, how we define as opposed to a shrine, or together to a shrine, and so on. Let's call all of these places places of worship. What was there? Okay. Maybe Ark of a Covenant, if you go to Egypt now, you see that, there were some all sorts of arks in Egypt, that they were producing. So maybe there was we know the Bible tells us that the Ark of the Covenant was traveling. It was in Shiloh for a while. Yes. It was in different locations. It was in Kiryat Yearim. There's a dig now in Kiryat Yearim. They try to find out what was going on in Kiryat Yearim, just outside of Jerusalem. Okay. At some point, it was captured by the Philistines, and then they had to return it, and King David had to return it. In other words, the Ark of the Covenant was traveling, okay, before it reached its final destination in Jerusalem, where the Bible would have it its final destination, this was supposed to be the destination through all the time, it just made a tour. So it seems to me that you can approach this question in two ways. One, you say, well, all of these places were a place where, the Ark of the Covenant spent some time on its way eventually to Jerusalem, until, the kingdom was created, etc., and King David brought the Ark of the Covenant there. Pay attention that, it never mentions that the Ark of the Covenant was in Mount Gerizim. Yes.
I wonder if there were competing arcs, though. I think that's kind of the point he's saying. I wonder if there were competing arcs since there were competing centers. Who knows?
Possibly. First of all, I believe that there was an arc. Someone didn't invent that.
Right. If you point out, like you said, if there were arcs in Egypt, it's not ridiculous to think that ritual shrine type arcs are floating around as, cultic practice. But
absolutely.
If I may take us to Josephus, because we only got 21 minutes. And, I know your time is very valuable.
I have an appointment I cannot avoid this time.
Yes, sir.
Well, we will continue more. Yeah.
I definitely have to have you back. Okay. Josephus says there are only two tribes in Rome.
Yeah.
Two tribes.
Yeah.
Judah and Benjamin.
Yeah.
And the 10 are east of the Euphrates beyond the river, right?
Yes.
As we discussed in our first episode, a mythological place, another land, Azeroth, which is actually just saying, it's in another land, but they created it as its own place and called it a name. It had a place name called Azeroth, which is just simply saying another place. And here he has a place. He's thinking east, out here, but not Rome. Paul, 20, 30 years before that, is over here running around in Rome, and he's trying to save people. He's presenting a Jewish, Hellenistic Jewish blend of things, especially if we take the picture we have from Acts where he's quoting Epimenides, a Greek poet from the 7th century BC, and Titus. Like, the guy's doing something obviously different, but there are some people that watched our first episode and were convinced and saying he supported our idea that Paul's actually going out in Rome trying to save lost Israel, the northern kingdom, which are paganized, according to them, actual Israelites. But Josephus must have missed this memo only 20 years later, and he's still thinking they're out here. So how do you solve Paul?
So this is interesting. Let's begin to understand. When we get to this, first of all, let's focus on. Let's very, very quickly identify the agendas of these two people. Okay, Paul clearly has an agenda. Okay, he wants. We shouldn't call it conversion, but he wants to assign a new, very powerful theological story, or a story with a theological meaning about a Messiah. Jesus Christ. Okay. And he considers his mission to spread that word. Now, Josephus may have plenty of agendas, but this was not, he didn't have a theological one. Okay. Maybe he wants to justify what he did, defecting to the Romans, etc. Recently in Israel, there was a whole attack on Josephus, calling him a traitor. Okay. Trying to replicate what he did to the contemporary situation between the right and the left in Israel. But that's a new story. That's a different story.
Right.
Okay. He doesn't have a clear theological agenda. He basically gives you, some sort of theologically neutral situation. And he says, okay, in my time, the conventional wisdom in Jerusalem was that we have existing two tribes in the revealed world. In other words, the world that we can see, the oikomene, the world that we can document, okay? And that's Judah and Benjamin. Then, tucked away somewhere else across the river, okay? In a place that I don't know. All I know is it's across the river, okay? You have 10 more. Now, he's obliged to believe that there are 10 more because, he believes in the biblical text. He doesn't change that, okay? So, since he doesn't have any agenda, that's what he says. And, since he's in Rome, he takes the two tribes that are revealed. He says, the Jews that you see here in Rome in my time, belong to these two tribes. Now, Paul, and I'm not an expert on Paul. Paul says, listen, I need to sell a story. And that story, in order to sell the story about Jesus Christ, in fact, I need to sell the whole Bible. Now, I need to sell the whole Bible to a population that basically needs to subscribe to it. And his strategy is very simple. He says, you see that it says there, in the gospel, the lost sheep, okay? Or the idea, the lost Israel, and so on. And then we have in the Bible all of these people who got lost, okay? Because, Isaiah refers to them as the lost in Assyria, etc., etc. Well, these are these people, okay? And they have been... And by the way, this is not the last time that people would say that, the 10 tribes have been, quote, paganized or heathenized. In the book, I'm talking about, someone wrote a letter to the editor in the 18th century in England. He says, where are the lost tribes? And the editor writes back, he says, we can't find them. They've been heathenized. In other words, they underwent some sort of a cultural and ethnic change that we don't know where they are right now. We need to discover them under layers of other cultures where they're hiding. Okay.
Right.
But here's the thing. When Paul says that, he says, okay, when I come now to people in different places in the Mediterranean and I tell them this powerful story about Christ, which entails telling them a story about God and about the creation and about, the covenant with Moses, everything, because without that, you don't have Christ, okay? It's better to tell them, actually, you once belonged to this group. You just don't know that I'm the one delivering the news to you. Okay. Now, think about, attempts to convert the Native Americans. Okay. So the persistence of the so-called Israelite Native American theory, the persistence of the question that the Native Americans were in fact descendants of the lost tribes, that later on morphed into other religions, for example, Mormonism, etc. Okay? Why it was so powerful? Because it didn't say we're trying to convert people completely. In other words, we're coming to do a hard reset on the hard drive and do that. We do a restore. Okay, we restore them to their original condition. Of course, we are the ones who decide for them what their original condition was. Yes, but it's a much more powerful, to my mind, much more powerful strategy when you're about to change someone's culture or religion. Okay, so it seems to me that when Paul says that in Rome, when he reassigns the term the lost sheep of Israel, he reassigns it into something that has a much more powerful meaning, in the sense that, okay, we know that there are people who got lost, okay? And my mission now is not to convert people from other religions to this new religion that I'm creating. It is to restore people to their original condition.
Do you think, historically speaking, taking you into the first century, because someone watching might be interested to hear more on this, you have God-fearers. God-fearers are technically pagans, heathens, if you will, who honored the God of Israel at synagogues amongst the diaspora out in Rome. So they're out there and they see and they find attraction. They might have Dionysus and Apollo and whatever other gods, but they said, hey, I want to add an extra God to the list, and Yahweh will be that God. Hey, my friend, the Jewish friend, here you go. Here's some money, help build your synagogue. And we have etched in the stone archaeology of like actual pagan names on these. Like, hey, you helped build this. Thank you. You're a God-fearer. You're honoring our God. Do you think Paul came to these people and said, whoa, hold on. We got heathens that are attracted to the God of Israel. This is them. These are the guys. They're the promised ones who would return. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Look, I'm not that much of an have knowledge about that, but it seems to me that this is something that he would embrace if his mission and his agenda is to expand the numbers of people who believe,
right,
in Christ, then definitely, if someone is doing that, then yes, of course. Okay. Now, let us not forget, this is a very, very active person who basically travels in different locations in the Mediterranean, purchasing souls, making souls, winning souls for Christ. Okay. So if that's the case, then yes, it seems to me that, no contradiction there. But what he wants to do is basically to come to all of these communities is listen, you see, the community that you've seen here, worshiping the deity Yahweh. Okay. We just recently had a little bit of an upgrade, and I'm introducing that upgrade to the system. Okay. And in some cases, it basically to say to people, I'm not changing who you are. I'm actually restoring you to what you were supposed to be. Okay. It's at least one strategy.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because let us not forget that one of his audiences is actually is Jews as well, not real Jews, but Jews, in these communities. Hebrews, what is Hebrews? What is the epistle to Hebrews? Okay.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a really well put. Yeah. Okay, you have 12 minutes, right? And I know you got to be on your way. You got to be raptured out of here.
Yeah.
Hopefully that goes well. Someone says you're Israel only, which is actually a doctrine that pretty much says that the Gentiles in Paul, even if it's in Paul's mind, like they're willing to flex on how historically real the pagans were Israelites or not. The point is, their idea is Paul believes his audience are lost Israelites. Or there's the idea that you say, this guy's got to win souls. So he's over here saying, oh, I'm restoring you. That's why you're interested and whatever. But
yeah. Well, let's say I'm Israel only.
Okay.
I'm not, but let's say I am. Okay. Then you ask, but then you ask, okay, the Israel only that you're talking about, what is it? Okay.
Right. They'll say ethnic. They get into the ethnic stuff, though.
And I would say this. I would say this. Okay, so let's take British Israelism, okay, which is very, very strong, used to be very strong in England, also very strong in the United States. You have different groups and so on. They are also Israel only, but their Israel is not my Israel.
Right.
Yes? Now, there are people in my own hometown in Jerusalem that are Israel only. And I can tell you that even though I speak the same language, born in the same city, some of them may be even physical relatives of mine, their Israel only is not my Israel only.
Right.
I mean, the thing is here is, yes, okay, there is a story here about an exclusivity of a certain group. But the way you define this group is different,
Can I give my 2 cents on why I think this is fascinating, what you're pointing out? This makes perfect sense historically why there is replacement theology. Paul opens a door. This is my personal 2 cents. I could be wrong, but this is where I'm at right now. These are pagans that are interested and attracted to monotheism. It's becoming more cosmopolitan. All you got to do is read Philo of Alexandria to see this. He's a Jew who says, hey, the law of God is for everyone. And whoa, what? But you have Paul preaching to pagans, and then at the same time he's identifying them as children of Abraham, and you go, whoa, no wonder the early pagan church is saying we've replaced Israel. We are Israel. We are the church of God. And I just say, if it wasn't that way, then why, if it was so ethnically exclusive, would it all of a sudden be taken over by people who supposedly would never even care to join it to begin with? Someone opened that door, and I say someone like Paul.
Yeah.
Makes the most sense to me. But I don't know.
Someone who has an agenda, basically said, and he was brilliant in the way in which he redefined what it means to be Israel. In fact, I think he preserved the onlyness and opened up the Israeliness. Okay.
Interesting.
So to go back to the person who said Zvi is Israel only, I get it, that there is this insistence on exclusivity. I mean, I recognize it as a scholar, and since I would like to think of myself as a human being with a sense of humor. I said, okay, you know what? I buy into this. I would admit, into that thing, because nobody is perfect. Okay. Yeah. But then again, ask me that only that you claim that you are, what is it? And then it turns out to be I recognize that there are many, could be many things. Okay. I mean, British Israelism started as a lunatic idea by someone who was like literally sitting in a mental asylum in London, a Canadian British officer in a mental asylum in London, when he was writing these missives about, Israel, England, the British people being, the true Israelites.
Wow.
Okay.
You said that in your book. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, that actually catches up and people subscribe to it. Not everybody, only few, but enough to turn it into a movement.
Is Paul crazy enough to create an expanded version of what he calls Israel? And that's what you're trying to say when you say that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he's a brilliant man. He uses a very rich repertoire, because he has a clear agenda in this regard, and he wants, to bring people into. I don't think he in a way he consciously thinks about a new faith. Yes, so he uses that as well. He uses the idea of, says, okay, the lost sheep, in this context. Oh yeah, in this context, all of these people who've been scattered all over the nations and became paganized or quote heathenized, and now we are like, what we're doing here is an act of restoration. Okay. And look, I come to you and I say, listen, my friend, my Roman friend, I'm going to restore you to a chosen race, to a chosen people, to people who've been blessed by this deity that I'm also selling to you as well. It's a kind of look at how much meaning I'm going to give now to your life. Okay. Now, some people would buy into it. Fact of the matter is, he was very, very successful.
And this makes a lot of sense when we read Galatians, for example, and there's competitors against Paul's message, and they're saying, oh, you're really one of those, huh? No, you need to be circumcised. You need to do this and that. And Paul's going, stop. These guys are lying. I don't know. How would you answer Paul's he kind of takes a stance like, nah, don't worry about buying into all that stuff.
This is becoming more, this is making me into more and more into something that I'm not, which is like a Paul expert.
Right.
But I can say one thing. When he talks about the circumcision of the heart, okay, he actually talks about, he re-invokes, a phrase that comes from Isaiah, okay? Umaltem et orlat levavchem, and you shall circumcise, the foreskin of your heart. Okay. Now, in Isaiah, it's clearly a metaphor. First of all, circumcision is a big deal issue. We don't even know, who in Jerusalem in in Isaiah's time was actually circumcised. There's debates about that. Yes. I mean, we don't know that babies were circumcised. Okay. But let's say they were. Okay. Clearly, Isaiah doesn't talk about canceling the practice of circumcision. He talks about the fact that, if circumcision is an act of purity, and again, I'm not saying that it was in his time, but let's accept that it was, okay? He clearly talks about a certain metaphor that, doesn't become meaningful until Paul says, oh, you know what it means? It actually means canceling the ritual of circumcising the flesh,
right?
And then circumcising the heart. It becomes now a meaning. Now this clearly cannot be what Isaiah meant. Okay? 800 years before Paul. Clearly cannot be what he meant. But he's using that, and he's using that incredibly powerfully again. Okay. Now Matthew is doing the same thing. When Matthew says, that the birth of Christ is the fulfillment of the prophecy. Is the fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah, Hine alma yoledet ben vekarat shmo Emmanuel. Here the virgin, or the lady shall give birth to a son, to a boy, and you should call him Emmanuel. Okay. When Isaiah said that, I just recently wrote a whole article about that particular little moment. Where Isaiah said that, I think he meant something completely different.
Right. Okay? I agree with you.
Yeah, he didn't mean, 800 years from now, there will be a baby, in the Galilee, in Bethlehem, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Clearly, also, when he says the lady, he doesn't necessarily mean the virgin.
Young lady, that doesn't even, there's a word in Hebrew for virgin, and they didn't even use it. So, yeah.
He says alma. Alma could mean all sorts of things, but basically a young woman or something like that. The point is that, when Matthew takes that sentence, he creates a line between him, between the event that he's describing, which is the birth of Jesus Christ, to a prophecy that existed as a letter, for 800 years, and comes to him as a text that he subscribed to, but he gives it a new meaning. Now, that makes these people who write that text, which we call the New Testament, in this particular case, also, in Paul, brilliant people, because what they do is they take something that existed that a lot of people are aware of, and they say, you know what that means? This is what it means.
They recontextualize.
Yes, but then also, they recontextualize, but they also imbue that with a new and very, very powerful meaning to that moment.
Wow.
Now, and I think in religions develop this way all the time. Even Judaism itself, for example, with the mystical turn, when you talk about, what we call Kabbalah or Kabbalah, that's a new meaning to ancient practices. But, someone comes in and says, okay, when you do that, you know what you're doing? You're engaging in a cosmic drama, yes, that is designed to bring God back to connection with humanity, okay? So that's a story. Think about, stories like the flood, okay? Maybe, we have evidence that, a lot of ancient peoples had stories about floods or about the flood and so on. Okay. And they existed in Mesopotamia and different places, maybe even, there were remnants of some historical event that happened, that some areas were flooded, And then someone comes in, the author of the book of Genesis, takes that story and turns it into a powerful drama about one man, whose job is to save not only humanity, but everything that lives on earth. Because God is about to punish everything living, and then takes the story about the dove and about the crow and says, okay, this is what's going to happen here.
Yeah.
Okay. And then suddenly this story that was, maybe somebody else's folklore for millennia or for centuries becomes the most important thing, for a new religion.
I love it. Hey, I love it for what it is, right? So I really do try to find out what it is. As you, as a scholar, that's your whole goal, to know these things. I got to ask you one question as I'm letting you go, because we got 30 seconds before we hit that 60-minute mark. I love you guys. Thank you for watching. Everyone who supports, seriously, get his book. Dr. Benite.
Yeah.
You're a Hebrew scholar, like Hebrew. In fact, your whole Facebook is covered in Hebrew. I can't speak any of it. I don't even know what it's saying, but I just
it's full of nonsense and rants about the Israeli government. You don't have to worry about that.
Well, I'm lucky then. I don't have to see it. The flood was it, if you're reading the Hebrew Bible, and I'm not talking about where it comes from, looking at possible intertextuality from older stuff, Gilgamesh, all that. I'm saying the biblical flood, is it universal for the known world? Or is it only a local flood?
Well, the way it is described in Genesis is basically me'al pnei adama, everywhere on earth.
It's not universal. Just the land, not just a local land, right?
No. It's totally universal.
Okay.
And by the way, I mean, if you read it carefully, then you realize that there are some conflicts in the story. Is it about rain, or actually is it the water are coming from covering the ground itself? You don't know where the source of the water is.
That's right.
You don't have the sources of water is. Okay. Is it that, in what way was Noah a righteous man? Was he a righteous man only in relations to the people in his time? By the way, Jewish tradition says, well, he wasn't that righteous. Simply that everybody around him was so wicked that he was righteous. Okay.
Real quick, I want audience, if you're not sure what book I'm talking about, this is the book, The 10 Lost Tribes, A World History. We had a plan. We were going to get into
I saw this question, what is this book? I was about to say Genesis. I didn't realize the question is about me. Yeah.
No, your book. Go get his book.
I mean,
fascinating
I'm not the author of Genesis.
Yeah, you're definitely not the author of Genesis.
God is the purported author of Genesis.
We were going to get into the Asiatic countries, and not just that, but like different countries, how they claimed to be lost tribes of Israel. Yeah. This mythos is still alive today. The Mormons did this in the 1830s with the Native Americans. Like, it's just wonderful finding out how this stuff worked in history, potentially so we don't repeat a lot of the stuff, because honestly, a lot of the stuff isn't pretty. There's some harm that has come from this.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan.
Word, and maybe we can continue at some later time. Let me just one thing here.
Please.
The question is not whether this story is true or not. The question is, since we notice that it travels across cultures, across geographies, and to different peoples, the question that we should ask is how and why it happens. Okay? How and why some people in England come to realize that come to claim that they are Israelites. Yes? How and why other people do that, or why people say this about other people. What are their agendas and what they're trying to get out of this? This is, I think that for historians, this is the questions that we need to ask, not whether this is true or not. Okay? That's my point.
Right. Yeah. Oh, wow. Thank you, Eric, again for the super chat. He says, thanks a lot. Ben-Dor Benite. I am starting reading your book. Thank you, Eric. If I misspelled your name there, man, I appreciate it. We'll talk soon, of course. He's
I hope that if you survive the introduction, you will attain Nirvana already. Yeah.
Well, everyone that I know, I love having you on. I really do. Let's do this again soon, and you can tell me, Derek, I'm not talking about anything before the first century. We're only going after if you want, because, I get stuck on the New Testament. That's just my thing. So, yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, never forget, if you're a lost person and you want to know your identity and you're looking at all these books, stop looking. Click on my YouTube channel and just remember, we are MythVision.